experimented with this over the years. Back in the 80s, I lived in Germany, and at that time, in fact, I was living at the headquarters of the Salem International Organization, saleminternational.org, and they had a little, not quite a hospital, it was a health center there, with a physician and a nurse and probably 24 or so beds, as it were. And these little health centers are just kind of scattered all over Europe or all over Germany. And there were a couple of young men there who were doing their military service or doing their public service, their national service, by volunteering to work with the hospital. And, because at that time, and I'm not sure what the law in Germany is right now, frankly, but at that point in time, when you got out of high school, you had to serve 1 year. You had to give 1 year of service to your country. The majority of young men, and this was just men, the majority of young men did that in nonprofit areas. And you could do it in pretty much any nonprofit area that, served the people. And, a smaller minority joined the army or some other branch of the military in Germany. And what it did was it got them out, right? It got them out into the world. It got them, seeing different parts of the country. It developed a sense of kind of national pride. The other thing is that a volunteer military is something that, frankly, I think we should be concerned about. And traditionally, many countries have been concerned about it. It is certainly something that was, a concern of the founders and the framers of the Constitution. I shared with you in the previous hour some of the, how the North Carolina Constitution, for example, said, as standing armies in times of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up. That was in the Vermont Constitution, that language. That was in the Virginia Constitution. That was in the Virginia Bill of Rights, 1776. It was the North Carolina Constitution, 1776. In 1780, it was in Massachusetts' Constitution. In 1784, it was in New Hampshire's Constitution. And in fact, this is the first draft of the Second Amendment. That the standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty and therefore ought to be avoided as far as the circumstances and protection of the community will admit. And that in all cases, the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. That was the first draft of the Second Amendment, or that was the second half of it. It starts out, that the people have a right to keep and bear arms, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. In other words, the whole idea of standing armies being something that could overthrow a government. So with an all-volunteer army, you get much less, it doesn't reflect America. And, I think that one of the reasons, frankly, why the Vietnam War ended when it did was because Americans were sick and tired of sending their kids via the draft off to fight a war that they didn't believe in. And back then, of course, if you were like George W. Bush and your daddy was a member of Congress, your daddy could get you a plum, assignment to the National Guard. I would do away with that. I would say no more plum assignments for wealthy people or politically connected people. But our military should reflect America. Jefferson back in the day said, in a letter to Madison in December of 1787, said, I hope I shall never see the day when paupers are willing to be shot at for a sixpence in America. I'm paraphrasing, but very, very close, something very close to that. And he talked about the need for a military that drew from all the people, the wealthy as well as the poor. Now, I realize this is not something that is super popular. I'll just put that right out there. That, everybody give give a year to their country. But in exchange for that, in Germany, you got unlimited college education all the way up to a PhD or an MD for free if you did that year of service for your country. We are having a conversation in America about student debt and student affordability and free college. Why not marry the two? Why not say, if you serve for a year, we're sort of doing that right now with the GI Bill, right? If you enlist in the military, after you get out, your education in a public university is fully paid for, 100%. Plus you get $1,000 a year tuition, for books. Plus you get, if you live in a rural area, you get a travel allowance so that you can travel to the big city where the colleges are. So, it's kind of a start. But basically what it does is it draws poor people into the military, which takes us back to Jefferson's comment about, poor people being willing to be shot at for a sixpence. Here's my thinking on this in the biggest context. When members of Congress are deciding whether or not they're going to take this country to war, and make no mistake about it, we are closer to that than most people realize. With Taiwan and China and with Ukraine and Russia, there is a very real possibility of war breaking out, not to mention smaller conflicts around the world. And when Congress is deciding whether to send their soldiers to war, I would like those members of Congress to have children and grandchildren in the military because we had a national draft. And we see far too little of that. It's basically, families of wealth. No, has anybody in the Trump family, for example, ever served in the military? No. In fact, Trump's grandfather was a draft dodger in Germany. It's why the Germans wouldn't let him come back. Specifically, because he was a draft dodger. So that's number one. And number two is we do have a draft in this country. We don't use it. But young men, when they turn 18, have to be registered with Selective Service. Number one, why isn't that registration with Selective Service? Because that's limited to citizens. Why is that not simultaneously a voter registration? Wouldn't that be a fairly easy thing to do when a young man registers with Selective Service at the age of 18, they are automatically registered to vote. And number two, women should be part of this. In other words, everybody is automatically registered to vote at 18, just as everybody is eligible for the draft. That was the bipartisan agreement. Democrats and Republicans came up with this in both the House and Senate for the military appropriations bill. Keep in mind, the founders, the people who wrote, or the framers, the people who wrote the Constitution, were so concerned about a standing army during time of peace that the only place in the entire Constitution where the government, where Congress is limited in how long it can appropriate money to spend, what period of time it can spend money over, was the military. Congress can appropriate $1 billion to build roads and spend it over the next 20 years if they want. But whatever they appropriate for the military cannot exceed 2 years. It's right there in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. No military appropriation shall exceed 2 years. Why did they put that in there? Because they wanted Congress every 2 years to be forced to ask itself the question, do we want to continue having a standing army? Now, since the War of 1812, that has been largely ignored, and passing the military appropriations bill every 2 years or even every year has become a normal thing. But if we're going to do that, if we're going to continue having this draft, and we are, why not A, tie it to voting, and B, tie it, B, include women, and C, actually use that draft? It seems like a straightforward process to me. And give people, college education or trade school or whatever they may want out of it as a result. But make it, extend it to everybody, and like I said, include voting on it. It seems like a way to get people to meet people that they otherwise wouldn't. A way of kind of throwing folks at the age of 18, at a very impressionable age, at a developmental stage, It's a transformation of life. It's a coming of age moment. That's psychologically a good thing, right?